All right, thanks. I hope you'll have a little bit of room left. I'm sure you're exhausted, but I hope that you are still going to stay awake a little bit longer to learn about one of my obvious favorite topics, art history. Art history is probably a class that not many of you have taken before. Is that a correct assumption? Do y'all even have art history at your high schools? Maybe AP art history? But I really love teaching it because it's a very interdisciplinary field. There are a lot of different things that connect in art history to make it really compelling for a lot of different majors and a lot of different kind of academic interests. So what we're going to talk about today is a man named Brunelleschi. Has anybody heard of Brunelleschi before? Studied him a little bit? Okay. So we're going to focus on three big contributions that he had to the art world. And I really enjoy studying about him and teaching about him because he had his hands in so many different aspects of the Renaissance. Before we start though, just know at the outset, y'all can interrupt me at any time. This does not need to be formal lecture-y. So if you have a question, ask, shout stuff out, do whatever you need to do to get your points across up here to me. Before we begin, can anybody tell me what you think of when you hear the word Renaissance? Beyonce, maybe, yeah. Ninja Turtles, perhaps? Yes. Right, Leonardo, anybody else? Yes, in the back. Italy, certainly, the Renaissance starts in Italy, yes. Michelangelo, far back. Florence, yes, all good things. Does anybody know what the word Renaissance means? Rebirth, bingo. So we're gonna kind of tiptoe our way into all of those different areas. We're gonna spend almost all of our time today focused on Florence. And we're gonna spend the entire time talking about this lovely gent, Filippo, AKA Pippo Brunelleschi. So you can call him Pippo if you want. He is considered, in Italian, a l'uomo universale, which means a Renaissance man. You guys have heard the word Renaissance man, no doubt, before. Generally, it's applied to people like Leonardo. But Brunelleschi came before Leonardo, and in my opinion, kind of paved the path for a lot of the contributions that Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, the other Ninja Turtles, would eventually bring to the Renaissance. So Brunelleschi is considered an early Renaissance artist, but he wasn't just an artist. He was also an engineer, a goldsmith, a clockmaker, architect, and a sculptor. So we're going to focus a little bit on all of those different categories of his contributions to art and science. One of the other reasons I really like studying Brunelleschi is because he really blurs the lines between art and science, art and technology, which is obviously the focus of a lot of your studies right now. I feel like in contemporary society, we kind of put people into one of two categories, right? You're either a scientist or you're an artist. STEM often leaves out that A in STEAM. But I personally think that these two ideas are very much interconnected. All artists need a little science, all scientists need a little bit of art, and Brunelleschi is someone who really manifests all of those ideas. So his three big contributions to art and science are the following. The first one we're going to talk about basically in chronological order is a big door competition. Now I know you're thinking, door competition, that doesn't sound super exciting, but it's very important in terms of what he would later add to artistic ideas and scientific ideas of the day. So we're going to talk about that first. Then we're going to talk about his big architectural achievement, which was building the dome of the Florence Cathedral around 1417. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how he invented, in quotes, he didn't really invent it, he really kind of more rediscovered linear perspective. So three really, really big things in a matter of a couple of decades, which would eventually shape the Renaissance to come after him. And there he is for you to consider in your mind as we talk about him. So, andiamo, let's go to Florence. Isn't it lovely? Has anybody been? It's just the best. I prefer Florence to Rome because it's small, it's super walkable, and it's just incredibly gloriously beautiful. And the most kind of defining feature of the city is this great, massive, wonderful church, which is known as the Duomo. So for the first part of this talk, we're going to talk about two big competitions that happened on this site. The first one is here at the baptistry. So notice that the baptistry, the place where the baptisms occurred, was separate from the rest of the church because in those days, you had to get baptized before you could even go in. So they wanted to keep everybody out until they had passed that initial kind of step to enter in the inside. So we're going to talk about a baptistry first, a competition there, and then eventually we're going to talk about the big competition to build the dome. So here's what you need to know a little bit about this church. First off, its technical name is Santa Maria delle Fiore. Anybody want to guess what that means? Church? Yes, it's a church, but what does it mean? Saint Mary of the Flowers. So Saint Mary of the Flowers, but most people in Florence call it the Duomo. Now this is a trick question. What do you think Duomo means? Haha, no. People constantly think it means dome. In fact, it means cathedral. So there are lots of Duomos in Italy that don't have a dome. It's just that this one does. So Duomo means cathedral. The technical name is Saint Mary of the Flowers. It was started in 1296, so most of it, everything except the dome, is considered Gothic. Okay, so here we go. First, let's start with the doors. As I said, the baptistry is a separate building from the rest of the church. And at the time that this competition was first announced in 1401, Florence was going through a hard time. Any guesses as to what's happening in Italy in the 1300s and 1400s? Yes. The plague, right? And in the past, when I taught about the plague, it was like this foreign concept, but now we're like, oh yeah, plague, I get that, right? Like we kind of understand the concept of a plague a little bit better these days. So Florence is in the midst of a plague. About a fifth of the population is dying or dead. And so the Wool Merchants Guild decides that they need a competition to win some divine favor. Let's make God happy. Let's make a big set of amazing doors for the front of the baptistry. So they say, we're going to announce this competition. Any goldsmith in Florence who wants to compete can, and this is what they had to do. So the contestants were given a specific shape. The shape of their contributions for the doors had to be in this style, which is called a quatrefoil, or like basically a four-leaf clover format. And they all had to tell the same story. The story was of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. In Florence, people particularly connected to this story because they too had been saved at the very, very last minute from an outside incursion by Milan. And so they identified with Abraham and Isaac and that story. So it's a common subject that is shown often in Florence. So two people were the finalists in this competition. One guy we've already heard of, Pippo, Filippo Brunelleschi, and the other one, Lorenzo Ghiberti. Okay, so these are the two finalists. Lots of other people entered, gets down to 7, and then eventually these two. So I'm kind of thinking like America's Got Talent of Florence, right? Like they're all putting in their stuff and doing all the bells and whistles to win the favor of the committee. So here they are. Who won? Which one won? Left or right? Left or right? Okay, it's kind of hard to decide, right? They're both pretty similar. They're both pretty successful. They both tell the story in a compelling way. Now, historically, when people learn about this moment in art history, everybody is taught that Ghiberti wins, the one on the left. But the truth is that it wasn't as simple as that. It wasn't a clear decision. here are the reasons why a lot of people really liked the Ghiberti better. They liked the reference to Greece and Rome. They liked the perspective. In terms of economic reasons, he used less bronze, so it was going to cost the city a lot less to make. But Brunelleschi's is pretty successful as well, right? It's dramatic. It's very much kind of bringing you in to the story. But here are kind of two reasons why we think that Ghiberti ultimately kind of curried favor more. One, again, the cost. He was going to save them a lot of money. And two, while he was competing, he went and asked all of the judges for their input. Kind of seems like cheating a little bit, right? Either resourceful, smart, but he definitely got more input from the committee versus Brunelleschi, who worked in relative isolation. Brunelleschi, sidebar, was difficult. People didn't really like him. He was usually disheveled, a little bit stanky, kind of wandering around, just creating a lot of drama. So he tended to work by himself and didn't get all of that buy-in from the committee. So even though I said people are traditionally taught that Ghiberti wins hands down, that is actually not true. What happened is the committee said, we like both of you. We want you to work together. And Brunelleschi said, no sirree. I'm not working with Ghiberti. I want to have autonomy. He can do it. So it wasn't so much that Ghiberti won, it's more that Brunelleschi backed out because he was a control freak and he wanted to be able to manage the process without input from the other guy. Okay, any questions so far? All right, so this is what Ghiberti eventually does. He makes the first set of doors after the first competition, and the committee and the city of Florence liked those so much that eventually, in 1425, they come back and ask him to make another set of doors. If you go to Florence and you go to the baptistry and you see swarms of tourists in front of these doors, they're not the real ones. They're really, really, really good copies, but the real ones are inside here in the Duomo Museum. So if you know much about bronze, it's very difficult to work with. It's very time-consuming. It's very costly. It's a very scientific process. And it ages, it darkens, it changes color over time. So the city of Florence eventually moved these inside the museum so that they could be protected from the elements. So what happens next? This is where the story gets interesting, in my opinion. Brunelleschi loses, aka quits, decides not to participate for whatever reason, and he goes to Rome. And I envision this as kind of like, you know, kids who are backpacking around Europe, not much stuff with them, kind of a vagabond, very much itinerant. And my favorite part of this story is that he goes with his buddy, his much younger buddy, who was just as difficult as he was, Donatello. So here's Donatello, here's Brunelleschi. They're just kind of traipsing around Rome, getting into trouble. Now, this is obviously Rome now, but Rome in those days was kind of a free-for-all. This was really before the Vatican had an awareness of how much these artists could bring to their power and propaganda, and much of the antiquity in Rome was just completely open. So much so that Donatello and Brunelleschi literally just start digging up whatever they want around these Roman ruins and putting it in sacks and taking it back to wherever they were staying. So they were kind of wild men, but they were wild men with a purpose. I feel like there should be a buddy movie about this, right? Like kind of Kevin Hart and The Rock style, where they're just moving around Rome and doing all sorts of mischievous things, but maybe one day that will happen. So they're there, and while they're digging stuff up, they're also writing many things down, especially Brunelleschi. He's kind of constantly jotting stuff down on pieces of parchment, all of these very cryptic measurements. So he's starting to experiment with architecture at this point. He's not just a goldsmith anymore. He becomes really interested in how can he build the way that the Romans built. So the place that he is most fascinated by is this glorious structure, which is in your guide, the Pantheon. Does anybody know anything about the Pantheon that you want to share? Yes. What's your name, since you're my number one question answerer of the day? Zachary, okay.
Okay, Brunelleschi Pantheon, largest dome up to about the Renaissance. Well, not quite.
Yeah.
Up until like the
Hagia Sophia.
Largest dome.
Huge dome. What is it? What is this building?
It's the Roman temple to all of their deities.
Right, it's a real convenient way to worship, right? We're just going to worship all the gods here. So Pantheon means all the gods. And what is it made out of? This is the key, yes. Concrete. I love concrete. My students get so sick of me yapping on about concrete, but concrete is so important for this building because it would not exist without concrete. So at the time that Brunelleschi is in Rome, most architects have forgotten how to do all of this. They don't even remember the recipe for Roman concrete, which involved this special volcanic ash that made it very long-lasting and durable. And they certainly cannot figure out how in the world the Romans built this dome. So Brunelleschi is in there doing all of his measurements and really trying to crack the code on this building because essentially for 1,400 years, no one could repeat this. Nobody could kind of discern what exactly was involved in building a structure like the Pantheon. So he eventually, we don't know exactly how long he's there, he eventually leaves Rome and goes back home. So he was a Florence boy. He grew up right next to the cathedral. And what you need to understand about the cathedral when he was growing up is that it did not have a dome on it. It had a big old hole. So here's the problem. It was started in 1296, and the architect who made the plans always knew there should be a dome, but he didn't know how to build it. Kind of problematic, right? Like you build the whole cathedral, but maybe someone one day can figure out how to build this dome. So it's sitting there. Florence is rising in power. Florence is becoming this great Renaissance city that is attracting all sorts of wealth and prosperity, and they can't have an unfinished, incomplete building in the heart of the town. So another competition happens. Florence decides now we're going to have to figure out a way to cover up this dome. And so there's a couple of problems with this. The traditional ways of building domes that people had used before, Florence couldn't proceed with. First off, they didn't have enough timber. They didn't have enough wood to build a big, huge scaffolding in the inside of the dome to support it. Two, they couldn't work with concrete because they didn't know how to make it. And three, they didn't want to do what the French were doing, which was using flying buttresses, those kind of weird supports on the outside of the cathedral, because that was not going to be Florentine enough. They wanted to come up with an innovative solution to this problem. So enter again Brunelleschi. So how does he come up with a solution? Well, he goes to the committee and he says, okay, I've got it figured out, but I'm not going to tell y'all how I've got it figured out. And they're like, okay, that doesn't really work, right? We need a little bit more information than that. And he says, why would I tell you how I'm going to do it? Because then that would allow you to do it and take credit for it. So here's what he does. He has an egg. He shows his egg to the whole committee and his competitors and says, anybody who can make this egg stand on its end should build the dome. Have you guys heard this story before? Okay. Do I have a volunteer from the audience who wants to make an egg stand on its end? I have an egg. Okay, come on up. This is the weirdest prop I've ever brought to any lecture. Okay, voila. Here is a plate just in case. Here is an egg. My emotional support chicken. Okay, so can you, in front of your piers here. Show us how you're going to make that egg stand on its end.
All right, so let's just start off. Which side is the end? Is this the end or is this the end? Both sides, okay. All right.
Let's see.
Oh my God, I didn't think about this.
It's okay.
I think the first thing we should start with prayer. You know, God. Dear Jesus, please let me do this. Don't let me fail in front of a bunch of people.
That probably is about how it went for the other people there in Florence in
I'm really
14, 17. Feeling the pressure?
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to balance it on the rim right
Okay.
now. And, that's not working. All right, hold on.
Okay.
I got it balanced.
Okay, well, I brought the wrong plate. Let's just say that.
All right.
It should be on a flat surface. But if there is no rim to keep it balanced, so you can make it stand for a hot minute, right? Like real quick. Anybody else want to try?
Yeah.
Anybody else know the gig here?
All right.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for trying.
Am I allowed to do anything with it?
Yes, you're asking the right question
I
too.
remember the original. Okay, so the original way that this was done, if I remember correctly, was what do I just say it?
Just do it. Just do it. Show them. Yep. It's okay if it starts oozing. Yeah, you gotta slam it.
It's cracking the plate.
It's okay. Okay, let me try.
It's cracking
This
the plate.
demo is not working as well as I had hoped. Okay, so here we go. Ta-da!
It's cracking the plate.
Oh, well.
Oh, I mean.
So, let me move this. So you can see that if you make it flat on the bottom, it achieves this kind of octagonal shape that's wider at the base and thinner at the top, okay? So obviously nobody was able to deduce that this was what he was gonna do, but it shows you kind of his innovative approach to the process. Did this really happen? We don't know for sure. It's likely that this happened, but it's kind of like one of those urban legends where people retell this story on a regular basis when referring to the Dome project, but it's not really written down anywhere with a great authority. So it's possible that it happened. It's a lovely anecdote, but we're not 100% certain. So the tricky part is Brunelleschi left behind 0 architectural drawings. So when we, much like when he was trying to figure out the Pantheon, when we are trying to figure out how he built it, we have to look at the evidence that's there. We have to look at the actual building. So here's what he did. Again, the hole is open from 1296 until he starts working on it in 1420. So over 100 years, this big church has the hole until he comes along and comes up with a process that's basically self-sustaining. So he builds it from the bottom up in a way that supports each level as it goes. He was also super smart in inventing this kind of chain that went around each level that was made out of wood and stone and iron that was meant to be kind of like a barrel. Like if you think of a big old wooden barrel or like a wine barrel, something kind of like that. The dome itself is 37,000 tons, which is astonishing, and includes 4 million bricks. So that number of bricks and the size makes it the biggest masonry dome in the world. So masonry meaning made out of brick. What was super smart about his process is he actually has 2 layers. So it's a double layer dome rather than just one. So that helps to support and kind of channel the force down to the base. It has these marble ribs as well. You can only see 8 on the outside, but there are 28 in total that anchored everything in place. And then he had a plan for this, but he didn't live to see it occur. At the top of the dome, up here, is something that's called a lantern, which kind of anchors it all in place. So here's a little bit of a diagram cutaway where you can see more of those rings, kind of the barrel parts that held it all together. And you can see how fast he was able to add brick by brick, layer by layer to get to the top. One thing that's amazing about the dome is you can go between the layers. And they're really outspoken about don't go up here if you're out of shape, claustrophobic, pregnant, etc., 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 because you are way high up in the sky in a tiny, tiny little space. So it's pretty remarkable that you can still squeeze between those two layers. But when you get to the top, probably worth it, right? And then you just reward yourself with some gelato when you get back down to the base and return to Earth. So one of the other things that I think kind of adds this really interesting aspect to Brunelleschi's life and art and science is that he was a great inventor, a la Leonardo. And one of his big inventions for building the dome at Santa Maria delle Fiore was this thing called the Great Hoist. So does anybody want to attempt to explain what this is or how it works or put this in your own words? Zachary.
Early crane.
A what?
Early crane.
Early crane? Okay, but how does it work?
Horse turns bottom, turns wheel, turns other wheel.
Yeah, pulleys and basically these kind of cogs and wheels. And the nice thing about the way that this works is the horse doesn't have to go forward and back up, but the horse can just walk in a continuous circle. So what do you think he would have been using this for? Yes? Getting the material up there, so all of the bricks and the other stone and iron bits and tile, etc. But also, in those days, there was kind of this bad habit of the workers. They would come down at lunchtime and they would drink a lot of wine and they wouldn't go back up. So he started sending them highly, highly diluted wine, the kind of wine that pregnant ladies drank back then. So he would send them diluted wine to the top of the tower so that they would have to stay up there. He would send their lunch. They couldn't come down and take a lunch break. So they were forced to remain up there for the entirety of the workday. That sounds pretty torturous to be up there for multiple hours, but he was kind of the first real construction contractor in some ways because he really wanted to have his hands on the pulse of the entire project, and he wanted to ensure that it got finished on time. By the way, how much money did he make doing this? He made about the equivalent of 2 years worth of work. So pretty significant sum, but it ended up taking him way more than 2 years to finish the project. Any questions about the Great Hoist, the dome, how he did it? Okay, so now we're going to talk about his last big contribution to art. For those of you who have taken any art classes, any drawing classes, any painting classes, you probably understand how this works. So now we're going to talk about his development of linear perspective. First, how does linear perspective work? Second, how did he figure this out? So first off, let's start here. Linear perspective is a mathematical system of making something that's two-dimensional look three-dimensional. And we believe that the Romans probably understood linear perspective in some way, but during the Middle Ages, almost all of that information was lost and or forgotten. So Brunelleschi comes along and he starts trying to figure out how to make something that is flat look like it has depth. And so he kind of comes up with this fundamental idea. So here's how perspective works. When you look at this diagram, first thing you need to figure out is where is the horizon line? What is the horizon line? What happens at the horizon line in an artwork? Yes? Not quite. Thanks for guessing, but what is the actual line, the horizon line? The vanishing point is on the horizon line, but what is the horizon line? Yes? Exactly, where the sky meets the earth or where the sky meets the sea. So if you're going to make a painting or a drawing that uses one point perspective, the vanishing point and the horizon line is usually at the viewer's eye level. So you have to take into account where is someone going to be looking at this artwork. Okay, so you have your horizon line where the sky meets the earth, and then on that horizon line, always on the horizon line, you're going to have a vanishing point. And what happens at that vanishing point? All sorts of lines, some of them are real lines and some of them are implied lines, meet diagonally, and those are called orthogonals. They meet at that vanishing point. Okay, so let's see this in a real artwork. This painting is a little bit later on, but it's a really easy way to understand how perspective works. This is an artist named Perugino. This is in the Sistine Chapel on the side walls. So Michelangelo's on the ceiling and the back wall. This is on the side walls. This is an artist named Perugino who was Raphael's teacher. So he's pretty important. So where is the horizon line? Right here. If you were in my class, I would have a piece of paper and you would be doing this with me together because it's easiest to figure out if you're actually tracing on here to see how it works. So you draw a line across here. Here's the horizon line. Where do you see diagonal lines? Yes, in the back. On the floor, on the tile of the piazza. So those are very literal diagonal lines. Do you see any that are more implied? Yeah. Okay, the edges of the buildings. Anything else? Zachary? The mountains, yes. Anything else? Yep. The people, right? So the people are not like literal diagonal lines, but if you follow their heads and their body language, they too pull you to the vanishing point. So where's the vanishing point? Just shout it out. The doors. So, okay, right there. Okay? Usually, if Jesus is in the painting, he's the vanishing point. But not so much in the case of this artwork because this is Jesus here and this is St. Peter there. And all of those lines are meant to pull you to the doorway to the background. So can you see how that use of perspective, that addition of math and lines, takes something that is flat and makes you feel kind of like you're looking through it with a sense of depth. Okay, does this make sense so far? Okay, so here we go. This is one of the first Renaissance artworks to actually use one-point perspective. And it's in Florence. It's in a church that's just a couple of blocks, if you will call them that, away from the Duomo. It's inside Santa Maria Novella, and it's a fresco. So it is a painting on the wall. Basically, the artist put plaster on the wall, and then the paint kind of adheres to the wall, and actually the wall becomes the painting. So the artwork here is by an artist named Masaccio. His nickname was Sloppy Tom because he was sloppy, but most art historians call him Masaccio. And the painting is 21 feet tall. So what did I say about the horizon line? What did I say about the vanishing point? Where is it in relationship to the viewer? At the eye level of the viewer. So when you're trying to figure out where is the vanishing point here, you need to figure out where are most people going to be in relationship to the 21-foot tall height of this fresco. So by the way, this is a painting called the Holy Trinity. What is the Holy Trinity, or who are the Holy Trinity? Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So I'll show you where they are all in just a second. And then we have this lady, Mary, John the Evangelist, and these are the two people who gave money for the fresco to be painted. So they're contemporary donors who contributed money for the painting. And then down here, could y'all see what's down here? A corpse, a skeleton, and above it, it's a memento mori. So it says basically, what I am, you're gonna be soon too. So it's kind of this reminder like, get it together because you're on your way out. So back to the painting. Where is the vanishing point? Yes. Say a little louder, sorry. Okay. And where do you see diagonals or are orthogonals that draw your eye to that vanishing point? Yeah. The ceiling arches. So those are called coffers, by the way. Those are also in the inside of the Pantheon. If you go inside the Pantheon, there's those kind of square coffers as well. And so if you follow those diagonals, they should pull your eye, to here. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that exact spot. I usually end up more like at the foot of the cross, like literally at the foot of Jesus. But if you're somewhere between Jesus' knees and the top of that, you're pretty much in the right spot. Okay, so this is the first big Renaissance painting that takes all of those ideas and puts them together to produce a really realistic look at a space that has some depth and dimension. So I said the painting is called the Holy Trinity, right? So you can see God, you can see Jesus. Where's the Holy Spirit? Just everywhere? No, it's right here, that dove. And forever, I could not see that dove at all. See it, the white dove? Light bulb. So I couldn't see that dove forever until I went there 2 summers ago. There's my kiddo. She's forced to go on like so many artsy-fartsy stuff all the time, but she just goes along with it. And I show you this picture because then you can see how big it is, right? It's a massively tall fresco in Santa Maria Novella, which was completely covered up for hundreds of years and recently uncovered and restored. And most people go in this church and just walk past it and have no idea what a glorious part of art history it is, but it's super important for all of the reasons that I outlined. So first, really big work to use perspective, but the question is, how did he figure this out, right? How did he come up with this? Because it's pretty smart. It's pretty much this kind of ultimate fusion of science and art to be able to deduce this simplistic way of changing something flat into something three-dimensional. So the first question is, before I explain the actual experiment, why do you think he did this? Why do you think he was interested in perspective? What is he making a lot of? Yes? Money? Well, yeah, Zachary, maybe some money. What else?
Probably making lots of observations of lots of various paintings.
Lots of observations of what? Remember when he was in Rome? Yeah. Buildings. He's doing all of these drawings of buildings because he's dabbling in architecture. So he needs to figure out a way, how do I make this building that I'm seeing in real life look accurate? Of the paintings and explains how this process works. So why is this important? Most of the Renaissance artworks that you can think of in your mind use linear perspective, the Last Supper, for example. And that would not have been possible without these ideas from Brunelleschi and without Alberti writing them down for other people to understand and study. Okay, questions about perspective? Well, by some miracle, I made it through the whole lecture, so I will take questions if y'all have any. But you've been asking and answering a lot so far. No? You just want to get out of here? I get that too. Okay, well, if you have any other questions, feel free to come up and talk afterwards. Yeah?
Can you explain camera obscura?
Yes, okay. So camera obscura, okay. So I wish I had some slides. I do have some slides somewhere, but I'm not going to dig them around right now. So a camera obscura can be kind of one of two things. It can be as big as a room, or it can be something as small as a wooden box on a table. Camera obscura in Latin means dark room. So for people who've studied photography, that should be a phrase that's familiar to you. So the way it started, it's been around for basically millennia, and early artists used camera obscuras to trace. So like Leonardo used one, Vermeer used one, and it was a way of recording whatever scene they had in front of them with accuracy. So here's how it works. Now, I am not a physicist, but I will explain this the best I can. Essentially, you need a completely dark box or a completely dark room with one hole in it. So there's only one source of light, and it's a tiny hole. And just by a pure natural process of optics, whatever is outside that hole is reflected upside down and backwards on the back of the wall of the camera obscura. So it just takes the light, just takes what's ever outside that hole. Sometimes it has a lens, sometimes it doesn't. You can recreate this process. There's YouTube videos of how to do it very simply. But basically, whatever is outside that hole is automatically, just by nature, physics, optics, reflected upside down and backwards on the back wall of the box. So then an artist can trace it. Eventually, when you get to photography, people started figuring out, okay, we can use this process and put a metal plate with photosensitive chemicals back there, and then you have a camera. So that's what leads to early photography eventually. Does that kind of help a little bit? I would look up some stuff on YouTube to see it, because it's very hard to explain in words, but if you see actually someone recreating one, it makes a little bit more sense. Any other questions? I almost thought about talking about photography, but you guys might not be so interested in it. Yeah.
How would they trace the dark room, or like look into the dark room?
Well, some of them are actually the size of a room, but like how Vermeer and Leonardo did that, I don't know. I would have to do some research to figure out the exact process of how they were able to get it without reducing the level of light in there. Yeah, so I'm not certain on that one. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for listening, especially at the end of the day. I hope you learned a little something. If y'all have any other questions, you can look me up on the UIW website. Send me whatever art historical questions you have. I'm happy to answer them, but thanks a lot. Bye.